now let's talk about underlying IP, because we have some experts about IP on this panel. How important is it for any successful show
What is IP?
or film? Intellectual property.
There we go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
How important is it for the success of a film or television show, and especially how important is it when we're talking about global transborder successes?
I think it's become commonplace for people to seek out quality IP, underlying material, comic books, books, newspaper stories, articles, etc. And it serves a few different things. One, it serves that there's very possibly a following, such as in the case of Game of Thrones. And sometimes it serves the marketing. The people can market based on this particular book series or articles or comic book. But also, a lot of the work of developing television or film is intensive as it is, and being able to access underlying material that has all of those world-building elements already established, character things already established, it provides fodder for people to use and save a lot of time and so forth in the development of the story.
It's such a risky business that I think people like to look at, oh, well, there's already a built-in audience for this title. So they're like, oh, there's proof of concept here. Clearly, a certain population liked this. They bought this book. They played this video game. So it makes it a little less risky, or at least a way where they can justify to their bosses, well, it was worth the risk because, look, it worked here. You know, it's interesting to look at what's happened this weekend with Warcraft, right, where it was, you know, that's a huge video game, right? And, I mean, so they were like, well, clearly this is going to...
So I've heard.
Yes, so it's, you know. But huge here, did wonderful here. But for some reason, just kind of okay in America. You never... So it makes it worth a gamble, but doesn't always mean you're going to win that gamble.
I think it's popular. It's one thing that outsider thinks if you're going to make a film, okay, attach it with a wonderful IP. You know, we've been involved with huge IPs, the Divergent series, 1, 2, 3, and you could say how many books were sold. But you know what? If the movies don't deliver, you can open the movie that weekend and you could bring the audience in with all this built-in stuff. But if people leave the theater and they're just like, I don't really get the movie, or they don't really talk positive about it, that's it, you know?
Well, it's challenging because, like, in a book, people have created in their own mind a story and a look, and so they have it in their head, and if when they go and sit down, sometimes if it doesn't match what they've done to their in their own minds, it can create a challenging experience there.
It has to be good, and story and characters and the world, the visuals and the visual effects that are put into the filmed content, it has to work in a way that works on its own merits. And I think that Hollywood is starting to realize that also.
Yeah. I was talking to my friends at Jerry Bruckheimer Production, and he gave me a really good example, which was, you know, when they made Pirates of the Caribbean, you know, they came up with this idea like, okay, we'll make it off this ride, and we're going to have this really quirky, you know, star. Johnny Depp is going to be this odd character, and they were so afraid that it wouldn't work, right? So they spent so much time tweaking the script, making sure things work, and they're just so afraid that it'll bomb. And then fast forward, they said, let's go make another IP, Prince of Persia, right? And they said, we got this star, and this video game, it's got action. And they thought it was a slam dunk. So they took their eye off the ball, and they made a film, and it tanked. And I asked him, I said, how do you know what's going to work or not? He said, you know what, you just really have to be careful. You can't think, well, I ticked it off, this is a huge video game, so it's a foregone conclusion. No, you got to make 90 minutes of something that takes the audience for a ride, and they can remember that ride.
I wonder if it's challenging with video games because in a game you get to be in it, and you get to choose what happens. And I wonder when you sit and watch a movie and you're a passenger instead of a pilot or a participant, whether that's not the same satisfaction that you get from the game, and whether there's a barrier there. Has there been a game that's translated really well into movies? Can you think of? I don't know. I'm racking my brain. There probably has been, but I wonder whether that's an issue. Maybe that's an issue for gamers going into movies. They
Yeah.
like to do it themselves.
I think, yeah, that's a really good point, and perhaps one of the reasons. But I think another reason is the development of a game from a game-centric point of view. They have their timeline of when to do what, and they're governed by that because they've invested so much money into doing the game. And when they make a movie, they license the movie rights out to a movie company. So in this case, versus Legendary, they licensed the Warcraft rights 10 years ago. You know, when they licensed it, it was a huge game, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it plateaued, and then it started declining. Meanwhile, the movie's still being developed, the script is coming together, the director, and this and that. So I think one of the issue with games and movies, if they're not being controlled by the same company, taking the same risk, they're just, it splits, and it rarely is coordinated.
But gamers are also a different psychographic than film goers, I think, and with modern day technologies, people get faster, they're entertained faster, and movies are apply to a specific story pacing and structure that doesn't necessarily
Did you say
attract.
psychographic?
Psychographic.
What's that?
Psychographic is a marketing term that's like demographic, but it's not specific to age, but to the way someone sees themselves. So if I see myself as a 16-year-old boy, you would want to sell me the types of things that a 16-year-old boy would want, not a 50-year-old man.
That's super cool. I learned something today, so I'm happy.
So on your point about timeline with IP, maybe there's somebody on this panel who can speak to what do you do when a television show starts to overtake the book property?
An anecdote. When I got a call 10 years ago now from an agent in New York that was representing George R.R. Martin, telling me that the 4th book in the series was about to debut the following week at #1 on the bestseller list. And I said, okay. And then the person clarified what they had said. No, #1 on every bestseller list in the world. And I said, oh.
That's kind of a big deal.
And with that, I realized that it was something, the time was now. So I made a phone call to George and said, we should sell your books now. I'd been trying for 4 years, keep in mind. And he said, I don't know how it ends yet. So no. And I said, I think we have to. It's going to happen whether we want it to or not. And so obviously, here we are, cut to 9 years later. The show is taking over the books, and we don't know how it ends yet.
So you're not going to give anything away here in the room to us? Spoilers?
Yeah, no, I'm not going to give it away. The only thing we know is who ends up on the throne at the end, but I'm not even going to tell you their sex. So
You might be bound and tortured here shortly, just to...
I look forward to it.